Imagine you are tracking a discrepancy at work. Maybe it is a missing receipt or an unbalanced ledger or just a minor administrative
A
error.
standard procedural anomaly.
Right, exactly. You
Exactly.
apply your focus to it, you track down the missing information, and you resolve the issue. Now, I want you to imagine applying that exact same obsessive, methodical, accountant-level attention to detail to a cross-border kidnapping.
And to a decades-long pursuit of a fugitive.
Yes, because that is exactly what one man, André Bamberski, did. You are about to hear a meticulously documented account of an international legal saga that completely defies standard classification.
It is a highly complex historical and legal timeline.
It really is. We are examining a chronological journey that spans nearly 40 years. It is a timeline originating in the chaotic aftermath of World War II, stretching through the Cold War era of rigid European borders, and concluding with a 2022 documentary.
The focus of this analysis relies strictly on court documents, medical reports, and established historical records.
That is our mission today. We are looking at a sprawling narrative centered on one father's relentless 30-year pursuit of justice across the sovereign borders of France and Germany. The core conflict we are examining focuses on the highly mysterious 1982 death of a 14-year-old girl named Kalinka Bamberski.
We will systematically detail the unprecedented lengths to which her father went when the legal and investigative systems of two neighboring nations fundamentally clashed.
You are going to hear how this conflict escalated. It goes from bureaucratic stalemates to civil litigation, international arrest warrants, and eventually extreme extralegal intervention.
The clinical themes we will analyze today are governed by rigid legal and medical frameworks. We will examine the strict limitations of bilateral extradition treaties between European nations.
Which is a huge part of this.
It is the defining structural barrier. We will also objectively analyze the application of double jeopardy, specifically within the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. Furthermore, we will break down the forensic challenges that arise from delayed medical investigations.
Right, the physical evidence.
Correct. The rapid degradation of physiological evidence and the profound, irreversible impact of procedural anomalies occurring during initial postmortem examinations.
So we're going to trace this biographical and legal timeline exhaustively. We are starting from the family's historical origins and moving right up to the recent media adaptations. We will map out every geographical relocation, every single court ruling, and every complex medical finding. Let us begin by establishing the origins, the massive historical displacements that set this sequence of events into motion.
We must begin with the biographical baseline of André Bamberski.
Right. He was born in France around the year 1938, and he is of Polish descent. His early life was immediately impacted by global conflict. During World War II, he was physically displaced. The Germans took him from his home and moved him across borders to
Germany and Poland?
Yes. You really have to consider the massive disruptions of this era to understand the geographic fluidity of his early life. He was a product of a shattered Europe, moving across lines drawn by war. But despite that early chaos, by the early 1970s, he had established a highly stable career as an accountant.
The historical data establishes his professional background in accountancy, which inherently requires a highly methodical, detail-oriented cognitive approach.
It is all about the details.
Exactly. This professional background in tracking discrepancies and navigating complex, structured financial architectures is a highly relevant variable. When observing his later approach to navigating incredibly dense legal and medical documentation over a 30-year period, this established cognitive baseline of forensic accounting provides the framework for his methodology.
An accountant is literally trained to find the one number that does not belong. So when he later looks at a coroner's report, he is not intimidated by the medical jargon. He is simply looking for the math that does not add up.
The analytical process is identical.
Following his establishment as an accountant, the timeline tracks André Bamberski and his wife, Danielle Gonen, moving across the Mediterranean. They relocate to Casablanca, Morocco. They lived there with their 2 children, one of whom was Kalinka.
Casablanca in the 1970s functioned as a major hub for European expatriates.
It was a very specific social environment, and it is in this setting that they encounter the next central figure in this timeline, Dr. Dieter Krombach. He was born in 1935. At the time of their meeting in Casablanca, he was working as a doctor at the German consulate. His specific medical specialty was cardiology. He was living in Morocco with his second wife.
At this juncture, there is a critical historical data point regarding Dieter Krombach. that must be impartially recorded.
The first wife.
Yes. Krombach's first wife experienced a sudden, unexplained death at the age of 24.
Which is incredibly young.
Within the strict clinical context of this timeline, this event functions as a background variable. It establishes an early pattern of proximity to unexpected, premature medical events occurring within his immediate domestic sphere.
Let us pause and look at what that actually means. A 24-year-old dying suddenly and without explanation is an incredible statistical anomaly, particularly when married to a medical professional. It hangs over the rest of the narrative. But moving forward in Casablanca, the social dynamic shifts from a professional expatriate community to a highly consequential domestic fracture.
A verifiable shift in domestic relations.
A secret affair begins between Dr. Dieter Krombach and André Bamberski's wife, Danielle Gonin. This affair eventually comes to light and leads to the absolute dissolution of both of their respective marriages. They leave their spouses, navigate the legal divorces, and legally marry each other in the year 1977.
The jurisdictional parameters change significantly at this point.
They do. Following this new marriage, André Bamberski's children, including young Kalinka, eventually relocate to Lindau, Germany to live with their mother and their new stepfather, Dr. Krombach. This geographic relocation from North Africa to Germany establishes the entire legal jurisdiction for the events that follow.
The relocation to Lindau, Germany, is the critical jurisdictional pivot in this historical record. It shifts the legal environment entirely from the North African expatriate community back to the European mainland, placing all subsequent medical, forensic, and legal events strictly under the purview of West German municipal and federal authorities of that specific era.
We are now moving to the events of July 1982. Let me paint a picture for you of Kalinka Bamberski at this exact point in time. She is 14 years old. The records describe her as a healthy, athletic teenager. She had no chronic illnesses. She was attending a French-language boarding school in Germany. It was the summer of 1982, and she was spending her summer vacation at the home of her mother and stepfather in Lindau.
A standard period of summer recess.
This brings us to the specific, fateful night of July 9th, 1982. The exact sequence of events for this evening was provided entirely by Dieter Krombach. He was the sole medical authority present. According to his official statement, right after the family had dinner, he administered an injection to Kalinka. The specific chemical substance he injected was called cobalt ferricit.
We must execute an extensive clinical analysis of cobalt ferricit to understand the subsequent medical debate. This substance is a combined cobalt and iron preparation.
What is the normal use case for something like that?
In standard medical pharmacology, intravenous or intramuscular iron preparations are typically utilized only for severe iron deficiency anemia, specifically when oral administration is ineffective or poorly tolerated by the gastrointestinal tract. The addition of cobalt in such historical formulations aim to stimulate erythropoiesis.
Wait, let us pause there so I'm tracking this correctly. Erythropoiesis, you just mean forcing the body to pump out more red blood cells, right?
That is physiologically correct.
Yeah.
It stimulates the bone marrow to increase red blood cell production. However, the administration of intravenous or intramuscular iron and cobalt carries significant, well-documented pharmacological risks.
Risks that would require a serious medical justification.
Precisely. These risks include severe systemic reactions, cardiovascular instability, and anaphylaxis. Dr. Krombach provided contradictory clinical rationales to the authorities for administering this specific high-risk preparation to a healthy 14-year-old.
He changed his story.
He did. Initially, the documented claim in the investigative record was that the injection was intended to aid in tanning, to help her skin darken in the summer sun.
A tanning aid, that is the first excuse.
Subsequently, this rationale was completely altered. He later claimed the injection was intended as a medical treatment for anemia. Neither explanation aligns with standard, evidence-based pediatric or internal medicine protocols for a patient presenting with her documented health profile.
Those contradictory explanations, moving from a cosmetic tanning aid to a treatment for a blood condition she did not have, form a massive part of the later investigations. Continuing with the timeline provided by Krombach for that night, he claimed that after administering the injection of cobalt ferricit, the evening proceeded normally. He stated that he told Kalinka to switch off her bedroom light at midnight.
That is the temporal marker he provided to investigators.
According to his official account, he found her dead in her room the next morning. Let us detail his documented actions upon making this discovery. He stated that he immediately administered various injections intended to revive her. Following these revival attempts, he called emergency services. Importantly, he later admitted an additional, highly significant detail to the authorities. He stated that he had also given her a sleeping pill on that same night of July 9, prior to her death.
The sequential administration of a cobalt iron preparation, followed by a central nervous system depressant, presents a highly anomalous pharmacological timeline.
And the revival injections.
The subsequent administration of unspecified revival injections post-mortem further compromises the physiological environment. This action severely complicates any subsequent toxicological analysis by introducing multiple exogenous compounds into the bloodstream after the cessation of metabolic function.
So he ruined the baseline.
Yes, it effectively masks the chemical baseline present at the exact time of death.
So, by injecting her after she was already gone, he essentially muddied the waters for any medical examiner trying to figure out what was in her system when her heart actually stopped. That brings us directly to the initial forensic investigation. An autopsy was conducted by German authorities 2 days later. However, this initial autopsy failed to establish a definitive cause of death. They could not point to a specific medical reason why this healthy 14-year-old girl simply stopped breathing.
The physical findings documented in that initial autopsy require objective categorization and precise physiological analysis. The forensic pathologists observed aspirated stomach contents in the airway and lungs, alongside undigested food in the stomach.
Okay, let us break down what that implies for the timeline.
We must explain the physiological implications of these specific findings. Gastric emptying is a strictly time-dependent mechanical process. The human stomach breaks down food over a predictable span of hours. The presence of undigested contents in the stomach strongly indicates that the cessation of the digestive process, and therefore the precise time of death, occurred within a very short temporal window following the ingestion of her last meal.
In other words, if she ate dinner at, say, 7:00 p.m. and the food was completely undigested, she did not die the next morning. She died almost immediately after eating.
That aligns with the physiological parameters of digestion. Furthermore, the presence of aspirated stomach contents in the respiratory tract indicates a specific neurological failure.
Meaning food matter was found in the airway and lungs.
Correct. This indicates a total failure of the gag reflex. This reflex is an involuntary defense mechanism. It is typically suppressed only during a profound state of central nervous system depression, such as a deep coma or pharmacological anesthesia.
So she could not clear her own airway.
Precisely. Therefore, the physiological evidence points to a rapid descent into unconsciousness shortly after the meal, leading to aspiration and immediate death.
Beyond the contents of the stomach and lungs, there were other findings documented in that first autopsy that fundamentally altered the trajectory of this entire case and drove André Bamberski's 30-year pursuit.
We have to discuss the physical trauma and the missing evidence.
Yes. The autopsy report documented physical signs indicating a post-mortem assault. Specifically, the forensic pathologists noted superficial trauma and clinical signs of assault that were judged, based on tissue response, to have occurred after the cessation of life.
And there was a chemical component found as well.
Additionally, there was a whitish chemical substance present at the anatomical site. Clinically, it must be noted in the historical record that this chemical substance was left completely untested by the investigating German toxicologist.
They just ignored it.
It was not processed for analysis. Furthermore, there was a highly irregular, severe procedural anomaly during this autopsy. Specific anatomical evidence, the organs in question, were surgically removed during the procedure and were subsequently permanently lost by the facility. Stop and think about the magnitude of that statement. The anatomical structures in question, the exact physical evidence of the assault, were surgically removed during a homicide investigation, misplaced, and permanently lost.
The absence of this anatomical evidence created an irreversible forensic void. It permanently precluded any future physical analysis of the localized trauma or the identification of the untested substance.
You can see why André Bamberski refused to accept the official narrative. Despite these massive red flags, the undigested food proving the timeline was a lie, the aspiration proving she was unconscious, the clinical signs of assault, the missing anatomical evidence, and the untested substance, the German prosecutor looked at this file and made the decision to decline opening a criminal case.
They categorized it as an indeterminate event.
They effectively declared it an unfortunate, unexplained medical anomaly. This decision is the exact catalyst that prompted André Bamberski to take direct action. He legally obtained a copy of the autopsy report himself. Utilizing his background as an accountant, he meticulously went through every line of the medical findings,
Applying his forensic methodology to the medical data.
Once he had the document and saw the undeniable discrepancies, he pressed relentlessly for a second investigation. This continuous pressure forced the German authorities to order additional expert reviews. Let us detail the findings of that subsequent expert review because it completely refutes the initial narrative provided by Krombach.
The subsequent expert review provided a precise pharmacological and physiological correction to the initial assumptions. The reviewing experts explicitly categorized cobalt ferlicet as a dangerous pharmaceutical agent capable of inducing immediate, severe adverse cardiovascular and respiratory reactions.
And regarding the timeline of those reactions,
Crucially, the review stated that such adverse reactions manifest immediately upon administration. This directly contradicts Dr. Krombach's timeline of a delayed overnight reaction.
right.
By synthesizing the pharmacological properties of the drug with the physiological evidence of undigested stomach contents and pulmonary aspiration, the expert review concluded that Krombach's timeline was physically unconvincing.
So the experts looked at the drug and said, this does not take 12 hours to kill you. It happens right now.
Correct. The clinical conclusion was that the injection, administered right after dinner, likely precipitated immediate circulatory failure, severe unconsciousness, vomiting, aspiration, and death within a highly compressed time frame immediately following the evening meal.
You would naturally expect such a definitive expert review to trigger immediate legal consequences, an arrest, and a trial. But that is not what happened. As we move into the 1980s, we enter a protracted period of severe legal stalemate. André Bamberski was holding these expert conclusions in his hands, but he was facing total inaction from the German state.
The state prosecutorial apparatus declined to advance the charges.
Driven to desperation, he decided to take his campaign directly to the public. In 1983, he initiated a widespread campaign of distributing accusatory leaflets throughout the town of Lindau, where Krombach lived and practiced medicine. He publicly named Dr. Krombach, explicitly detailing the clinical findings from the autopsy and the expert review, and openly accusing him of the crimes surrounding Kalinka's death.
The distribution of these leaflets transitions the conflict from the realm of criminal investigation into the domain of civil litigation.
Because Krombach fought back legally.
Dr. Krombach retaliated against the leaflet campaign by initiating a defamation lawsuit against André Bamberski in the German civil courts.
Let us break down the outcome of that defamation suit because it highlights a massive structural issue. The German court ruled in favor of Dr. Krombach. They awarded him a massive judgment of 500,000 German marks. Bamberski, acting on his absolute conviction of the facts and the medical evidence he possessed, flatly refused to pay a single mark of this judgment.
To understand this civil ruling, we must execute an objective analysis of how libel and defamation laws function within a strict legal framework, particularly in the absence of a corresponding criminal conviction.
Right, because there was no criminal trial yet.
In civil defamation cases, the burden of proof rests heavily on the individual making the public accusations to prove their absolute, legally recognized factual veracity. Because the German state prosecutors had previously declined to pursue criminal charges against Krombach, Bamberski possessed no formal criminal verdict to substantiate his public claims.
So the court defaults to protecting the unconvicted citizen.
Therefore, from a strictly procedural standpoint, the civil court recognized the leaflets as defamatory. This legal mechanism effectively forces an individual into severe financial debt for stating claims publicly that have not been ratified by the criminal justice system, regardless of the supporting medical documentation or expert reviews they might possess.
It is a staggering reality. The state refuses to prosecute, so if you tell the truth about what happened, you are legally guilty of defamation because the state did not prove it first. Despite this massive financial penalty hanging over him, Bamberski did not stop. He escalated his legal strategy in Germany by hiring a very high-profile German defense lawyer, Rolf Bossi, to force the criminal issue.
They utilized appellate mechanisms within the German judiciary.
They pushed the case all the way up the chain to the higher regional court in Munich. But in 1987, they hit the ultimate, impenetrable dead end within the German legal system. The Munich ruling formally declared that there was insufficient evidence to prove that Krombach's injection caused the girl's death, either negligently or intentionally. With that 1987 ruling, the legal avenues in Germany were officially and permanently closed.
The Munich ruling represents a rigid institutional adherence to the principle of evidentiary thresholds.
It just needed more physical proof.
The court determined that the existing forensic data, heavily compromised by the initial procedural anomalies, specifically the lost anatomical evidence and the passage of time, could not cross the threshold required to establish definitive, undeniable causality. They could not legally link the administration of the compound to the physiological cessation of life to the exact standard required for a criminal conviction of negligence or intentional harm.
With the German system firmly shut, the geographical focus of our timeline shifts entirely to France. We are now looking at the exhumation, the first French trial, and the massive intervention of the European Court of Human Rights. Bamberski knew he had to change jurisdictions. In 1985, Kalinka's body, which had been interred in Toulouse, France, was exhumed for further analysis by French authorities.
However, as noted previously, the missing anatomical evidence from the first German autopsy completely prevented any new physical analysis of the specific localized trauma.
That evidence was gone forever.
The inability to conduct new tissue analysis during the 1985 exhumation highlights the permanent compounding damage inflicted by the initial forensic irregularities. However, an exhaustive evaluation of the existing paperwork and tissue samples was ordered by French medical professionals.
And what did they find in the remaining samples?
This French medical review heavily criticized the methodological rigor and the generally poor quality of the initial German toxicological reports. Furthermore, by analyzing the tissue at the primary injection site on the right arm, the French doctors asserted a critical timeline correction. The histological data indicated that the injection occurred very close to the exact time of death.
So by looking at the tissue where the needle went in, they could tell her heart stopped pumping blood almost immediately after the puncture.
Correct. The cellular response at the injection site corroborated the revised German expert review and further dismantled the overnight timeline proposed by the stepfather.
Armed with this rigorous French medical assessment, Bamberski engaged in intense, continuous lobbying of the French justice system. His exhaustive efforts finally yielded a major result 10 years later. In 1995, a trial was held in France. But here is the catch. Because Krombach remains safely in Germany, and Germany strictly does not extradite its own citizens, Krombach was tried in absentia.
Procedural status is significant.
That means he was tried with an empty chair in the courtroom. He was not physically present. The verdict of this 1995 French trial was a conviction. He was officially sentenced to 15 years in prison for the charge of intentionally afflicting bodily harm which caused unintentional death.
A trial in absentia is a highly specific legal procedure utilized by certain sovereign nations, such as France, when a defendant is outside their physical jurisdiction and extradition cannot be executed.
It makes him a fugitive, right?
The conviction effectively renders the defendant a fugitive within the borders of the convicting nation. Crucially, it triggers international arrest protocols, such as Interpol notices, which remain dormant until the individual crosses into a compliant international jurisdiction.
That exact dormant international protocol was triggered in the year 2000. It is a highly surprising twist in the chronological timeline. Dr. Krombach was traveling on a train through Western Austria. An Austrian police officer, who had remarkably seen a photograph distributed by Bamberski's Relentless awareness campaign, recognized Krombach sitting on the train.
The execution of the warrant was immediate.
He was immediately arrested by Austrian authorities. Krombach was taken into custody and spent 3 weeks sitting in an Austrian jail cell while the legal mechanics of his arrest were fiercely debated across borders.
The arrest in Austria activated a highly complex jurisdictional dispute governed by international law and European treaties. We must execute an objective breakdown of these mechanics.
It was a three-way legal battle.
An Austrian judge was tasked with evaluating the legality of the French arrest warrant, which was based entirely on the 1995 in absentia conviction. Krombach's defense argued that the French trial violated fundamental legal principles because he was not present to cross-examine witnesses or defend himself.
And the Austrian judge agreed.
The Austrian judge accepted this procedural argument, citing the illegality of the French trial under broader European legal standards, and subsequently ordered Krombach's release, allowing him to immediately return to the safety of Germany.
So Austria looks at the French conviction, decides it does not meet their standards because he was not in the room, and lets him go. But the release in Austria was just the beginning of the complete reversal of the French verdict. The case ascended to the absolute highest levels of European legal authority. In 2001, the European Court of Human Rights, known as the ECHR, issued a sweeping ruling that completely annulled the 1995 French verdict.
The 2001 ECHR ruling must be dissected strictly on its procedural merits, independent of the medical facts of the 1982 death. The court formally censured the French judicial system, ruling that the in absentia trial process violated the defendant's fundamental right to a fair trial, specifically the right to be present and mount an adequate defense.
They threw the whole thing out.
The annulment was not an exoneration of the medical facts or declaration of innocence. Rather, it was a strict enforcement of procedural human rights law. The ETHR mandated that a conviction secured without the defendant's ability to participate was legally invalid.
And there was a financial penalty against France.
Furthermore, as a direct consequence of this procedural violation by the French state, the ECHR awarded Krombach a financial compensation of 100,000 francs.
I want you to really absorb that sequence of events. France convicts him of a horrific crime, Austria arrests him, and the European court steps in, wipes out the conviction because of a procedural rule, and actually forces the state to pay the convicted man 100,000 francs. You have a situation where the international legal system seems perfectly designed to protect the accused while offering absolutely zero recourse for the victim's family. But while this massive international legal battle regarding the events of 1982 was happening, a completely separate timeline was unfolding back in Germany, a timeline that established a documented clinical pattern of abuse. We must now turn our attention to the year 1997. In a completely separate trial in Germany, Dr. Krombach faced new criminal charges regarding his active medical practice.
This involves new victims and new judicial proceedings.
During this 1997 trial, he provided a formal, documented confession to drugging a 16-year-old female patient and subsequently assaulting her inside his medical office.
This 1997 confession provides an indispensable clinical data point for the broader narrative. It permanently transitions the previous theories of pharmacological manipulation from the realm of suspicion into an empirically verified pattern of behavior.
It matched the earlier theories perfectly.
The methodology confessed to in 1997, utilizing his authority as a physician to administer a central nervous system depressant for the express purpose of facilitating an assault, mirrors the exact physiological sequence hypothesized by the French and secondary German medical reviews regarding the events of 1982.
The legal consequences for this 1997 confession are a matter of public record, and they are striking. For the premeditated drugging and assault of a 16-year-old patient in his care, the German court handed down a 2-year suspended sentence. He did not serve a single day of prison time for this felony conviction. However, as a direct administrative result of the felony, he permanently lost his license to practice medicine in Germany.
We must analytically address the broader investigative context surrounding this 1997 conviction. Following his highly publicized confession, multiple other individuals came forward to the authorities alleging similar historical instances of abuse perpetrated by the physician.
But the prosecutors did not move forward on those.
However, prosecutors did not pursue these additional cases. This inaction is strictly rooted in the evidentiary requirements intrinsic to historical abuse allegations within the legal framework. Without contemporaneous physical evidence, such as immediate toxicological screens or fresh forensic examinations, prosecutors determined that the evidentiary threshold required to secure a conviction could not be met.
Because the drugs were long gone from their systems.
This highlights a persistent structural limitation in the legal system when dealing with historical pharmacological assaults, where the chemical evidence has naturally metabolized or degraded over time.
Even after losing his medical license, the pattern of behavior continued to manifest in the legal records. In 2006, Krombach faced the German courts yet again. This time, he was convicted of practicing medicine without a license. For this offense, he received a 28-month prison sentence. He served 11 months of that sentence behind bars before being released, with the remainder of the sentence suspended.
He resumed treating patients illegally.
The fact that he continued to illegally practice medicine after his license was permanently revoked became a matter of significant public interest in Germany.
The 2006 conviction for practicing without a license demonstrates a persistent, documented noncompliance with judicial and regulatory sanctions. It establishes a verifiable behavioral timeline wherein the individual repeatedly circumvented the legal restrictions explicitly designed to remove his access to patients and controlled pharmaceutical compounds.
This ongoing pattern of behavior eventually attracted the attention of the media. In that same year, 2006, a German television documentary was produced titled Kalinka's Final Journey. This documentary included highly significant media testimonies. Most notably, it featured detailed on-camera interviews with 2 teenage sisters. These sisters recounted nearly identical experiences with Dr. Krombach.
The clinical details of their accounts are vital.
They stated publicly that he befriended them, administered injections of iron cobalt into their systems, and subsequently assaulted them while they were incapacitated.
The inclusion of these identical accounts in the documentary provides further corroborating data regarding the specific chemical compound utilized. The repeated, verified instances of iron cobalt administration as a precursor to assault solidify the clinical pattern. The unusual choice of this specific, high-risk pharmacological agent acts as a unique forensic signature, linking the disparate events across decades.
You can see how this massive accumulation of evidence, confessions, and testimonies weighed on André Bamberski. He is watching this man confess to drugging patients, go to jail for practicing without a license, and be accused by multiple women on national television of using the exact same drug that killed his daughter. Yet, despite this overwhelming pattern, the legal avenues to pursue justice for the 1982 death remained entirely blocked by the German state. This brings us to the most dramatic escalation in this entire timeline: the 2009 abduction and the resulting unprecedented breach of national sovereignty. We have to look at the ticking clock that forced this extreme escalation. In 2004, the German government formally and officially declined a renewed extradition request from France, explicitly declaring that, as far as their jurisdiction was concerned, the case was permanently closed.
A formal rejection of international cooperation on the matter.
Furthermore, Bamberski was facing a rigid temporal boundary in France. The French statute of limitations for the crime was set to expire absolutely in the year 2012.
A statute of limitations is a strict legislative mandate that sets the maximum time after an event within which legal proceedings may be initiated. As the 2012 deadline rapidly approached, the legal reality became absolute. If the defendant was not physically present on French soil before that specific date, the judicial system would be permanently barred from pursuing the case, regardless of any new evidence, confessions, or historical patterns of behavior. It is a hard deadline. This temporal constraint acts as a severe operational pressure point on all parties involved.
Driven by the impending 2012 deadline, the 2004 German refusal, and 30 years of accumulated grief and forensic accounting, Bamberski executed an extra-legal plan. If the law would not bring Krombach to France, Bamberski decided he was going to do it himself. We are now examining the events of October 17, 2009. Bamberski arranged and paid for a team of kidnappers to forcefully abduct Dieter Krombach. Krombach, who was 74 years old at the time, was taken from his home in the town of Scheidegg, located in Bavaria, Germany.
The operation involved a violent extraction.
The physical execution of this abduction was highly violent. The records indicate Krombach was beaten during the seizure. He was then forced into a vehicle and driven across the international border into Mulhouse, France. Upon arrival in Mulhouse, he was left physically chained to a fence in close proximity to a local police station. Medical reports from his subsequent discovery by French police note that he suffered a fractured skull during the ordeal.
The mechanical logistics of this event constitute a direct physical circumvention of established extradition treaties and international law. By physically transporting the individual across the Schengen border without state authorization, the actors forcefully shifted the legal jurisdiction from a non-extraditing sovereign state to the state holding the active arrest warrant.
They bypassed the treaties entirely.
The physical trauma sustained, including the cranial fracture, underscores the volatile and uncontrolled nature of extralegal transport.
The aftermath of this brazen abduction was immediate and legally complex. André Bamberski was quickly arrested by French authorities. At the time of his arrest, he was found in possession of 19,000 euros in cash, which was intended as the payment for the team of kidnappers. The presence of Krombach in French custody, combined with the arrest of Bamberski, triggered an immediate and severe diplomatic crisis between the two nations.
We must clinically unpack the dynamics of this international law dispute. The situation created a profound friction between vigilante actions and sovereign legal boundaries. The Federal Republic of Germany issued a formal diplomatic demand for the immediate return of their citizen, citing the strictly illegal nature of his removal from German soil.
Germany wanted him back immediately.
Furthermore, Germany issued extradition requests for Bamberski and the unidentified perpetrators of the kidnapping to face serious charges in a German court.
And France's response.
Conversely, the French Republic outright refused both demands. France asserted its sovereign right to execute its outstanding arrest warrant against Krombach, now that he was physically present within its borders, regardless of the extralegal mechanism of his arrival. This impasse perfectly illustrates the systemic vulnerability of bilateral treaties when confronted with unauthorized civilian intervention.
Because France refused to return him, Dieter Krombach was now, finally, facing the French judicial system in person. He was no longer an empty chair. This moves us into the final French trials and the concluding years of Krombach's life. The new trial proceedings officially began in France in 2011. Because this was a new trial with the defendant physically present, new evidence was permitted to be brought forward. The prosecution introduced highly damaging new testimonies that spanned decades of his life.
The admission of new witness testimony was a critical procedural advantage.
One critical piece of evidence involved a German woman who testified about an affair she had with Krombach when she was just 16 years old. She noted a specific operational detail during her testimony. She stated that Krombach would systematically drug his wife to facilitate their illicit encounters in the home.
This specific testimony is clinically vital as it establishes a documented precedent for the tactical administration of incapacitating agents within the domestic environment to eliminate witnesses or bypass consent. It demonstrates its sophisticated pre-existing methodology for utilizing chemical compounds to control the immediate physical surroundings and manipulate the awareness of those in his proximity.
The prosecution did not stop there. Multiple other women were brought to the stand during this 2011 trial. They testified to similar systematic abuse, with all their accounts involving the administration of cobalt iron injections prior to the assaults. Based on this massive accumulation of historical and physiological evidence, the French prosecution formalized their theory of the 1982 event. They argued that the drugging of the 14-year-old was not an accidental medical error, but a calculated, premeditated act specifically designed to facilitate a subsequent assault.
The legal definition of premeditation requires the demonstration of prior intent and planning. By introducing the testimonies of the systematic use of cobalt iron injections to incapacitate other victims, the prosecution successfully argued that the injection administered in 1982 was part of a planned operational sequence, thereby satisfying the strict legal criteria for intentional bodily harm.
The jury evaluated the physical evidence, the corrected medical timelines, the missing anatomical evidence, and the newly established behavioral pattern. On October 22, 2011, the French court delivered its verdict. Dieter Krombach was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The specific charge he was convicted of was causing intentional bodily harm, resulting in unintentional death. With the conviction secured, the timeline immediately enters an extensive appeals process.
The defense utilized all available appellate mechanisms.
The defense exhausted every single legal avenue available within the French system. The conviction was first subjected to a rigorous appeal, which resulted in a confirmation of the verdict in December of 2012. The defense then escalated the matter to the highest legal authority in the country, the Court of Cassation, which ultimately rejected the appeal in April 2014, making the French verdict final.
Following the exhaustion of all domestic legal remedies within France, the defense strategy pivoted back to the international arena. They submitted a final appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, invoking a critical principle of international law.
They brought up double jeopardy.
The defense argued that the 2011 French conviction violated the principle of double jeopardy, legally known as non bis in idem. They claimed that the defendant was being prosecuted twice for the exact same offense, given the previous investigations and civil rulings in Germany.
The ruling on this final international appeal came down in March 2018. The ECHR reviewed the complex, multinational history of the case and issued their final decision.
We must provide a precise legal analysis of the March 2018 ECHR ruling. The court objectively evaluated the double jeopardy claim under the strict guidelines of the European Convention on Human Rights. The court rejected the defense's appeal.
How did they justify the rejection?
The clinical explanation for this rejection rests on the exact definition of sovereign jurisdiction. The ECHR clarified that the independent prosecutorial actions, or the decisions not to prosecute, made by the sovereign state of Germany, do not legally negate or override the independent prosecutorial rights of the sovereign state of France. The principle of double jeopardy, as interpreted by the court in this specific context, does not prevent two independent sovereign nations from executing their own separate judicial processes regarding the same event,
As long as they follow their own rules.
provided those processes align with their internal legal codes and do not violate fundamental procedural rights.
So, because Germany and France are separate countries, France is not bound by Germany's decision to drop the case. That 2018 ruling permanently closed the legal dispute over the 1982 events. We will now complete the biographical timeline for Dieter Krombach. He remained incarcerated in the French prison system. In 2016, a lower court initially ordered his release due to declining health reasons, but that decision was quickly overturned upon appeal by the prosecution, and he remained in custody. He was eventually granted a final release from prison in February of 2020, strictly due to his severe deteriorating health condition.
His physiological decline necessitated medical transfer.
He was transported back to his home country. He died on September 12, 2020, while residing in a German care facility. But Krombach's death is not the final legal action in this timeline. We must now examine the judicial consequences for the man who engineered the abduction, André Bamberski.
The procedural mechanics of bringing Bamberski to trial require careful examination. As previously noted, Germany issued a formal extradition demand to prosecute him for the kidnapping orchestrated on German soil.
And France reviewed that demand.
In 2009, a regional court in Toulouse, France, formally reviewed this German extradition request. The French court rejected the demand, enforcing the principle that a sovereign nation reserves the right to prosecute its own citizens domestically for crimes committed abroad, ensuring he would face trial exclusively within the French legal system.
The trial of André Bamberski took place over 2 days, May 22 and 23, in the year 2014. During these proceedings, Bamberski did not mount a complex defense regarding his actions. He provided a full, unambiguous confession to the court, admitting that he had orchestrated, funded, and agreed to the forceful abduction of Krombach from Germany. Based on this full confession and the established facts of the kidnapping, the French court handed down his sentence. He was given a 1-year suspended jail term.
We must offer an impartial analysis of the extreme judicial juxtaposition present in this sentencing. A 1-year suspended sentence for orchestrating an international abduction resulting in physical trauma is an exceptionally lenient application of the penal code.
It is incredibly light for a kidnapping conviction.
It highlights a rare instance where the rigid enforcement of international borders and extradition protocols is weighed against the human element of a decades-long procedural failure. The sentencing judge explicitly acknowledged the strict illegality of the vigilante action while simultaneously applying maximum judicial discretion to minimize the punitive outcome for the individual who executed it. This reflects an implicit institutional recognition of the systemic vacuum that preceded the act.
The judge essentially looked at 30 years of blocked justice and decided not to punish the father for finally forcing the issue. With the legal avenues finally exhausted for both men, the legacy of this nearly 40-year ordeal transitioned entirely into the public record and media. I will walk you through the properties that have cemented this timeline into the public consciousness up to the present day. In 2016, a French-German drama film was released based heavily on the historical timeline. It was titled Kalinka in Europe and was released on home video and on-demand platforms under the title In Her Name. More recently, the entire sequence of events was adapted into a 2022 Netflix true crime documentary directed by Antoine Tesson titled My Daughter's Killer.
The proliferation of these media adaptations serves to solidify the disparate medical, legal, and biographical data points into a cohesive, widely accessible historical record. They translate the clinical complexities of forensic toxicology and international extradition law into a standardized narrative format for broader consumption.
We have now mapped the sheer, unbelievable scale of this ordeal. You have followed a chronological journey that began with a boarding school summer vacation in 1982. It navigated through decades of dismissed autopsies and contradictory court rulings across 2 nations. It involved a brazen cross-border abduction in 2009 and ultimately concluded with a streaming documentary in 2022.
To summarize the factual data objectively, this timeline demonstrates how profound discrepancies in initial forensic methodology, specifically the loss of vital anatomical evidence, when combined with the rigid structural limitations of international extradition treaties, can effectively stall legal proceedings for multiple decades. The data clearly indicates that when these 2 systemic failures intersect, the resulting procedural paralysis can ultimately precipitate extreme, extra-legal interventions designed to forcefully bypass the sovereign deadlock.
You have heard the facts, the medical analyses, and the international laws that define this case. But it leaves you with a final, highly provocative question to consider on your own. When 2 sovereign legal systems are perfectly functioning according to their own internal rules, yet those rules are completely incompatible with each other, does international law actually protect the accused? Or does it simply create a permanent vacuum where justice is impossible to achieve through legal means? Thanks for listening.